Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into an absolutely fascinating 1,000-year stretch of ancient Indian history. We're going to trace the exact step-by-step journey of how nomadic Indo-Aryan tribes first arrived and settled, and then how they eventually evolved into some of the most powerful, highly structured empires the ancient world had ever seen. It's an incredible transformation, so let's get right into it.
Okay, let's just take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the early Vedic period. Then we'll break down their foundational texts known as the four Vedas. After that, we'll shift into the later Vedic period, explore their rapidly changing social order, and wrap it all up with the explosive rise of the Mahajanapadas.
All right, Section 1, the early Vedic period. Specifically, the arrival of the Indo-Aryans from roughly 1500 BCE to 1000 BCE. So, our story really kicks off with a nomadic group originally from Central Asia. Around 1500 BCE, they crossed the rugged Hindu Kush mountains and made their way right into the Indian subcontinent. These folks came to be known as the Indo-Aryans.
Now let's anchor ourselves geographically for a second. When these early Aryans arrived, they settled down in a massive, incredibly fertile region they called the Sapta Sindhu, which literally translates to the land of seven rivers. This area covered a huge footprint, spanning from eastern Afghanistan straight through modern Pakistan and Punjab, all the way into parts of western Uttar Pradesh. Basically, this lush, river-fed geography was the absolute cradle for early Vedic society.
Moving on to Section 2, the four Vedas, the true foundation of knowledge for this era. As these nomadic pastoral groups settled down, they started composing literature that was so profoundly important, we literally named the entire age after it. In fact, the word Veda itself literally translates to knowledge.
Let's break down these four sacred texts because they really form the bedrock of everything we're talking about today. First up is the Rigveda. This is widely considered the oldest religious text in the world. Composed right there in the early Vedic period, it contains exactly 1,028 hymns divided into 10 sections or mandalas. Then you have the Yajurveda, which acts as a guide outlining the precise ways of performing rituals. The Samaveda, on the other hand, deals heavily with music. And finally, the Atharvaveda, which is kind of uniquely fascinating because it's filled with spells and magical formulae.
Okay, quick pop quiz based on what we just went over. Which of those four Vedas is traditionally associated with the very origins of Indian music? Think about it for a second. Yep, you guessed it, it's the Samaveda for sure. So how did these early people actually organize themselves day to day? Well, it was a very organic, bottom-up kind of political structure. The absolute basic foundational unit was the family, known as a kula. This was a patriarchal setup headed by the eldest male called the Kulapa. Now, when several families grouped together, they formed a clan, or a vish. And when you grouped multiple clans together, boom, you get the largest political unit of the era, the tribe, which they called the Jana.
Now, what's really interesting about their administration is just how egalitarian early Vedic society actually was. The tribe was led by a Rajan, basically a battle leader and protector. But get this, the role wasn't hereditary. The Rajan was actually selected by the men of the clan. And he didn't rule alone. He relied heavily on assemblies like the Sabha, the Samiti, and the Vidata. Crucially, women actively participated in these assemblies and held a lot of respect and status. Plus, even though they had key officials like a royal priest, the Purohita, and a military leader, the Senani, they didn't even have a regular standing army yet.
What about their daily lives? Well, everything was heavily skill-based. Whether you were farming, rearing cattle, weaving, or even making chariots, your job was tied to your actual abilities. And taxation? Completely flexible. There were no regular taxes. Instead, the government ran on spoils from battle and a voluntary tribute system called Bali. When it was time to kick back, they loved chariot racing. They enjoyed diets rich in milk, ghee, and traditional drinks like soma and sura. Religiously, they didn't worship idols at all. Instead, they performed yajnas, or fire sacrifices, and chanted hymns to powerful nature gods like Agni the fire god, Surya the sun god, and Indra the god of storms.
All right, let's jump into Section 3, the later Vedic period, also known as the Epic Age, spanning from 1000 BCE down to 600 BCE. Now, it's called the Epic Age because this is when legendary texts like the Mahabharata and Ramayana were developed. During this time, we see the Aryans physically expanding further east, pushing into the fertile Ganga-Yamuna region, a land they proudly called Aryavarta.
With this massive geographic expansion came an equally massive shift in political power. Those days of selecting a Rajan, totally gone. Kingship became strictly hereditary, meaning the eldest son automatically got the throne. Kings started amassing huge, permanent standing armies equipped with horse chariots and even war elephants. They expanded their borders relentlessly, using elaborate royal sacrifices like the Ashvamedha, Vajrapeya, and Rajasuya yajnas to flex their dominance. Even their faith transformed. Those early nature gods took a back seat, replaced by a new trinity of primary deities: Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer.
Which brings us to Section 4. A changing social order and the rise of Varnas. Honestly, perhaps the most profound change during this entire epic age wasn't the expanding borders or the new gods, it was what happened to the people. We see society transform from a flexible, skill-based community into an incredibly rigid, immovable hierarchy.
This new rigid structure was called the Varna system. Society was firmly split into 4 distinct groups, and your place in it was now 100% determined by your birth. Right at the top were the Brahmins, the priests who performed religious duties and interpreted laws. Just below them were the Kshatriyas, the warriors and ruling class responsible for protection. Then came the Vaishyas, who were the skilled traders, merchants, and agriculturalists keeping the economy moving. Finally, at the base were the Shudras, the unskilled workers whose societal role was to serve the other 3 Varnas.
Even education completely changed, becoming highly structured through what's known as the Gurukul system. Imagine this: around the age of 7, young boys would literally pack up, leave their families, and move into the guru's house. These were peaceful retreats out in the forest, where they would live for years. The education was entirely oral, no textbooks. They absorbed Vedic literature, astronomy, medicine, and the art of warfare directly from their teacher. And when they finally graduated, they were required to offer a customary payment to their teacher, a parting gift of sorts known as Guru Dakshina.
If we step back, this brilliantly illustrates just how stark the contrast is between these 2 eras. In the early Vedic period, things were fluid. Caste was based heavily on skill, kings were selected by the people, and women held a significantly better status, actively participating in tribal assemblies. But flash forward to the later Vedic period, and society has hardened completely. Caste is strictly locked by birth, women's status sharply declined, we even start seeing the emergence of child marriage, kings became all-powerful and hereditary, and simple nature worship morphed into highly complex rituals and mandatory payments. It's almost a completely different world.
And that leads us to Section 5, the rise of the Mahajanapadas. This is really the climax of our story today. All of this expansion, all of this consolidation of power, and this rigid social structuring, it all comes to a head around 500 BCE. This is the era when those once small tribal footprints explode into immense, highly structured states.
Talk about a growth spurt. Let's trace it out. We started centuries earlier with those small tribes, the Janas. As ambitious kings started using aggressive military conquest and clever matrimonial alliances in the 6th century BCE, those small tribes grew into much larger territories known as Janapadas. Eventually, these rapidly snowballed into massive, incredibly sophisticated kingdoms and republics that we call the Mahajanapadas.
In total, exactly 16 Mahajanapadas emerged, creating this vast, sprawling network of major capital cities that absolutely dominated the Indian subcontinent. You had places like Magadha in the east, ruling from its capital at Rajgriha, all the way over to Gandhara in the northwest, centered around Taxila. We also saw major hubs like Kosala, Vatsa, Avanti, and Kashi. The whole region transformed into a patchwork of deeply organized, formidable states. Among them all, Magadha became an absolute powerhouse. Why? Because they built an incredible economic engine. They appointed specific officers whose sole job was to routinely collect taxes from agriculture, carpenters, weavers, you name it. And these taxes were versatile. You could pay in cash, in kind, or even by offering your physical services to the king. But as you can imagine, with society becoming so highly structured, and with the later Vedic rituals feeling increasingly rigid and compulsory, a lot of people started to push back. This deep frustration actually sparked a profound philosophical revolution toward the end of this period, paving the exact way for 2 major new philosophies to emerge: Buddhism, founded by Gautam Buddha, and Jainism, founded by Mahavira.
All right, let's take a quick breath and just look at the timeline as a whole. In the span of just 1,000 years, we've gone from the early Indo-Aryans settling in the Sapta Sindhu around 1500 BCE to their steady eastward push into the Ganga-Yamuna region around 1000 BCE. By 600 BCE, society had locked into the rigid, birth-based Varna system and hereditary kingship, which directly set the stage for the massive, wealthy, and powerful 16 Mahajanapadas by 500 BCE. So it leaves us with a truly fascinating question to chew on. How exactly did small, egalitarian, nomadic tribes settling near a river inevitably lay the foundation for some of the mightiest, most heavily structured, and heavily taxed empires of the ancient world? Was this centralization of absolute power just an unavoidable consequence of human settlement and agricultural surplus? It's wild to think about, and it's a huge testament to how rapidly and dramatically human civilization can evolve. Keep that incredible transformation in your mind as you continue exploring the amazing depths of ancient history.